Yes, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on the California Proprietarian Podcast, or CAPropCast, as we'd like to call it here. I am your host, Philip Young, and this is my very illustrious guest today, Mr. David Milton. He's an attorney and former judge, and we brought him on to discuss some of the pertinent legal and judicial issues that have arisen in the past few months, weeks, and days. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Mr. Milton here, and he can explain his background and his expertise, and we can then dive into the meat of today's food for thought.
Well, thank you for inviting me to participate in the show today, Philip. To tell you a little bit about myself, I spent 36 years in public service. I've been a lawyer for, this is going on my 46th year. I've been in private practice for the last 10 years as a private judge, handling arbitrations and mediations and those types of things. But during my 36 years in public service, I was 12 years as a prosecutor, handling some of the most difficult cases you could handle in an entire country, state or federal. I then was appointed to the bench where I served as a judge for 24 years, so a total of 36 years. And during my tenure in the prosecutors, as a prosecutor, I drafted 2 death penalty bills, and they pertain to gang misconduct, the murders committed by gang members. One was what we call a drive-by shooting, or shooting from an automobile causing death, and the other one was shooting into an inhabited dwelling. The drive-by shooting both were sponsored by former Senator Ed Royce, and the legislature did, in fact, pass the drive-by shooting, but they declined to pass the shooting into the inhabited dwelling for reasons I completely disagree with, but that is what occurred. So as a prosecutor as well, I was able to achieve 2 death verdicts. And keep in mind, I'm not saying this in any sense a celebratory way. It's just my experience. As a judge, I sentenced an individual to death, in my view, very richly deserved. And so I'm very law and order. I'm not extreme. I insist on following the law, whether that's as a prosecutor or a judge.
Well, thank you so much, sir, for explaining all that. That's considerable experience to have on anyone's resume, right there. Especially as an attorney. And I think so many people out there, including people in this audience, will very much appreciate having somebody who is speaking out in favor of law and order at a time when that has been so undervalued and our society is suffering terribly because of it. And, when we think of the breakdown of law and order, we probably sometimes think of the more violent, more serious felonies. But I think what people often forget is that when violent, more serious felonies are not prosecuted properly and crime is not prosecuted properly across the board, there's also an exponential increase in the petty crimes that terrorize and make people miserable every day. There's increases in robberies on the street, bag snatching, and then recently we've seen organized retail theft rings. And I think all of this is because the policies that you advocated for and that you practiced during your time in public service, have been abandoned by Soros-funded far-left district attorneys like George Gascon and Larry Krasner over in Philly, and Alvin Bragg over in Manhattan, just to name a few. And I think we're seeing those those pernicious effects right there. But if I may, sir, and even though this might be outside of your area of normal practice, what I'd like to go into a little bit are some recent headlines that have a lot to do with the judiciary and the legal practice, so that you can lend your armchair knowledge to that. And one of them is the recent extension of FISA. Well, it hasn't been extended yet. The recent House of Representatives vote to extend the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, Section 702 specifically, for another 2 years. And I wanted to just real quick, if I may, just to give a brief layman's overview of what FISA is. It was passed by Congress, I think, for the first time in 1978, and it was intended to provide the U.S. federal government, the security state, the intelligence state, with the means to intercept communications in the United States that originated from hostile foreign actors. To spy on those communications and gather national security related information and intelligence thereby. And a special FISA court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, was created to grant requests for such surveillance. And if I may state my personal view on that, I'm a little leery of that, and the reason for that is because the normal due process described in the Fourth and Fifth Amendments do not often do not apply to the FISA court, and also the FISA courts operate secretly. Their hearings are conducted in secret. Their rulings are given in secret, and so it seems to function sometimes as a bit of a star chamber. And in 2016, it was used against the Trump campaign. The FBI lied using information obtained by British spy Christopher Steele in the infamous Steele dossier, and they submitted that information claiming it was true to the FISA court, and then used it to obtain a FISA warrant to spy on the Trump campaign. And with all that, sir, I was wondering if you could lend your legal knowledge to analyzing the potential ramifications in the future of this FISA extension, and why you think it is or is not constitutional, and if so, why that might be.
Well, Philip, as you know, I think the public has gotten a little confused as to what the extension of 702 is, the House resolution, and as opposed to the FISA process that's been in place since, as you mentioned, 1978. Uh, the House Resolution 702, this extends the ability to surveil foreign actors without a warrant who are not, and they are acting from abroad. This is different than actors within the country, where the FISA 1978 FISA process would be in play. So we're talking about this 702 extension for persons outside this country who are meaning harm to this country, for instance, and the ability to surveil and gather intelligence without a warrant. And I think this is something that's necessary in my view. And as a matter of fact, if you think this out, few countries have all the protections that the citizens enjoy in the United States. In the authoritarian government, they do it on a regular basis. There is no right to privacy. And then there are those countries that are somewhere in between where there are some limited rights to privacy. But this act is pertaining to just saying actors from without this country who mean us harm, or we believe that we should look into their activities. We don't need judicial authorization to do that. That's what 702 is about. Now, if you're in the United States and we're talking about surveillance on citizens or even non-citizens, you've got to demonstrate to the FISA court probable cause. This probable cause, we as lawyers know what the requirements are. And you mentioned the Steele dossier. The news accounts that I've heard indicate that this was a false dossier purchased by Hillary Clinton. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but this is what's out there. And if in fact that is the case, that warrant should be quashed or traversed. But then you think about, well, what's the remedy? The remedy for someone presenting false information to a judge in order to acquire a FISA warrant, the right to spy on someone like President Trump. Well, the damage has been done. So what's the remedy? Usually in criminal cases, if you have a situation like that, any evidence that was acquired as a result of under the execution of that warrant would be inadmissible in any jurisdiction. But this is a case that sounds like it was politically motivated, and the damage has been done. So then you have to look at the actor the person who did that, let's say that it's true that Mrs. Clinton provided knowingly false Steele dossier in order to procure this warrant. Well, anyone else would be prosecuted criminally for that misconduct. And we know this, the Department of Justice, they've done very little in investigating doing things like that. So I don't want to, if you want to interject another question there, but I've signed many warrants as a Superior Court judge, as a municipal court judge. I've signed many warrants. Law enforcement agencies come in and say, here's my probable cause. And if at a later time it was determined that the material that they presented to me was false, there are remedies, and that's exclusion of the material that was seized. So those are the protections under a normal. It's kind of similar. The FISA process. FISA, there's a FISA court, and if the FISA court judge denies that warrant, there's an appeal, FISA appeal court, where you can go there to see if that judge would give release and authorize the warrant. So those are different than this 702 extension for the next 2 years, which I think what's going on in the world, what's going on in this country, our open borders, I think it's critical to have the ability to monitor foreign actors who are not on our soil without judicial approval.
I'm curious, sir. I guess the other element of the this whole FISA issue that I wanted to delve into a little bit is the FISA courts do operate more secretively, I think, than a normal court did, probably than your court did back when you were a superior court judge. And do you think that there's a danger in some cases of such a court evolving into kind of a star chamber?
Well, the any law enforcement agencies at the state level that presents material at a warrant application for a warrant with an affidavit setting forth certain things, it's private during the time until it's actually served.
Mhm.
Only then that it becomes public, and then defense counsel can challenge that warrant. I think there's probably a very similar. You don't want. You need secrecy before a warrant is issued. Otherwise, you kind of defeat the whole purpose for the warrant. Yeah, there's destruction of evidence, and those types of things like that are the major concern. It's a crime to alert anyone in advance that there is a warrant that's being issued and being executed on a certain day. And that's why, to me, it was very suspect that when the Mar-a-Lago estate was raided, and news agencies were there at the time of law enforcement agencies. Now, someone alerted those news agencies, and that's a concern. There's always someone who's willing to disobey the law for their own purposes, and those are the fears. I mean, I'll ask you the question. Why do you think that the news agency CNN knew and had their cameras ready to go on the Mar-a-Lago raid? How did they know that in advance?
Well, I would imagine somebody on either the FBI or the Department of Injustice investigative team tipped them off. That's the only logical conclusion. And something very similar happened years ago when Roger Stone was raided
Absolutely.
at his home.
That was the more glaring example.
Yes.
Roger Stone, and we're talking about misdemeanors.
Yes.
Why in the world would you need a cadre of law enforcement, SWAT team type people, law enforcement people there to go to Roger Stone's home on misdemeanors? Had someone telephoned Mr. Stone or his lawyer and said, surrender him. You want to search the house? Fine. But this was a display, and it's just politicized, and that's I just see the breakdown in our system of justice here in the United States.
Very much so. And it seems to be to have been also a deliberate act of intimidation.
I
To
I
opponents
concur.
of the regime.
I concur.
That's
Yeah.
how it appears. And Mr. Stone, I think there were 29 agents in tactical gear, as I recall. There was a helicopter. There were armored vehicles.
Yes.
I mean, you would think he was a member of Al Qaeda,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
judging by that response.
For misdemeanors.
For all of the offenses that he was charged with were nonviolent procedural crimes. I think of a more white collar nature. what I remember.
Yeah. Well, and when I mentioned Mar-a-Lago earlier,
Mhm.
it was actually the Stone case that I
Oh, okay, yes. Well,
that was coming to mind. The events there,
same idea,
but yeah, right.
it's, the same principle holds, so that's no problem. Yeah, I suppose I can understand from a purely constitutional and textual standpoint why FISA might be within the boundaries established by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Of course, you explain very well why some degree of secrecy is necessary. During the application process for a warrant, particularly when enemy foreign espionage is potentially involved. It's just I guess, are there any additional safeguards you can recommend that might prevent situations like what happened with the Trump campaign being wiretapped because of the Steele dossier? Are there any recommendations you can make to prevent such a thing from happening in the future? Policy recommendations, I suppose.
That's a good question, and the reason it would be difficult for me to respond to that question is I'm not. Uh, I've never practiced the federal level, and so much of what I can see, at least what's in the news accounts, it just seems like it's so politicized. We've always, in the past, we've relied on agencies like the FBI to do the right thing, to be protective of interests without regard to politics. And today, it just looks like they they respond to the whim of the Democratic Party. That's just what it looks like to me. I could be wrong, but it just seems it's to me it's blatant. As a matter of fact, and just the you can see it's almost like a two-tiered system here going on.
Very much so, perhaps even a multi-tiered system. There might be, more than two tiers to it, and I have to wonder if part of the reason for that is because, as we know, and it's understandable that the FBI has this standard, but to become an FBI agent, you need a minimum of a bachelor's degree. Now, I have nothing against, obviously, academics or being highly educated. You're a highly educated individual. I Pepperdine. But it's no secret to anyone that the vast majority of the time, university campuses are very, very left wing. And so I have to wonder if these FBI agents are attending these very left wing campuses, and they're being ideologically indoctrinated, and then they're moving on into federal law enforcement, and then
Well, that's a good point. I think unless things have changed in the last several years, I think the minimum qualification to serve as a special agent for the FBI would be 4-year bachelor's degree plus 5 additional years in law enforcement. Or you have a JD, a law degree, or you're, say, a CPA, perhaps. I think those were some of the exceptions. But to your comment of indoctrination of students, I think it's happening on a much lower level. Indoctrination. There's no question about that. It's been accomplished through infiltration. Our major institutions, in my view, in this country, banking, educational, law enforcement, military, and other important institutions in this country have been infiltrated by, in my view, socialists, communists, or other people who mean to take this country in a different direction, and in my view, a harmful direction. And they're patient. They will wait decades to reach their objectives. There could be retirements and deaths. These people will be replaced by others who have the same objectives. So that's my concern today.
they're playing the long game,
Yeah.
so to speak. It's like you could call it a cultural revolution by stealth, to use Maoist terminology. And we know from the beginning, from the days of Lenin, for example, and even earlier from the days of Antonio Gramsci and the Frankfurt School, that the goal of the Marxists, even of that era, was to use subtle subversion and infiltration to destroy the major institutions that uphold Western civilization, most especially traditional faith and religion and the traditional family.
Yes.
And they know that if they can break down those traditional allegiances and those barriers, those guardrails, they know that the only allegiance that will be left is the state itself. And if they then have captured the state, well, then they have totalitarian power.
And here's what suspect is why we're seeing what we're witnessing today. You said capture the state. Look at this. Look at what's happening here. Why does the Biden administration? Remember on day one, he stopped construction of that wall. He did some pretty important things. He lift he lifted the stay in Mexico policy. So we've got a completely open border where the Mayorkas is. I just can't restrain myself here. He's disgusts me with his demagoguery. It's just absolutely untrue what he says. I wouldn't trust anything he says. He needs to be impeached, booted out of office, and prosecuted for what he's done, the destruction he's done, and continues to perpetrate these things on a daily basis with a straight. He's a lawyer. He knows what the responsibilities of those offices are. That office is. But the thing is, we're talking about open borders and Soros putting these soft on crime DAs of strategic major cities in this country who are not only releasing serious felons from prison, but they're refusing to prosecute those who ought to be in prison. They want to defund our police departments, and to top it off, they want to take away your means to protect yourself.
Yes.
This is what this is a dangerous movement in this country.
Well, because they won't hesitate for a second to prosecute you for being a law-abiding gun owner. If they can find any sort of little technical avenue to do that, they certainly will. And it's one of those things. I think it was Cicero that said, "Show me the man, and I'll show you the crime." And they take that logic and that principle to its extreme. If they catch, even if you have a concealed carry permit, if they catch you carrying in what they define as a sensitive area, and you're a law-abiding concealed carrier and gun owner, then there is a good chance that people like George Gascon will use that opportunity to try to prosecute you.
Well, the effect of some of these rules may seem a little bit innocuous or, well, uh, not impactful. Is when, let's say, for instance, the person who has a concealed carry permit, there's so many restrictions on where it can be carried, and there are rules that say, well, you can't leave it in your car and lock it in your car. That's here in California. That just passed last year. Now, so if you have a CCP, you have a CC W permit. You can't lock in your car now, and you're in a public place. You can't take it in this restaurant. You can't take it in a school. You can't take it in the park and all. Well, where can you take it? Right? So basically, they've eliminated your ability to carry concealed.
In probably 80% of situations that one would normally encounter in public as one goes about one's daily business.
Yes,
You
right.
know,
And my question is, why wouldn't you want law-abiding people with the ability to carry a firearm? These are people who are interested in protecting themselves and others. You have a right to self-defense and a right to protect third parties. And those are the type of people who go in and get that concealed carry permit. It's the person who's the criminal who doesn't care whether you have a right to permit or not.
yeah, I don't think criminals. I don't think too many thugs are applying for permits.
There you go.
With their local
There you go.
sheriff's office. And as far as tyrannical prosecutors exploiting legal loopholes to target their ideological or political opponents, I wanted to delve real quick in the last few minutes into some into a case that surrounds some of the January 6th prosecutions. Now, of course, it's no secret to anyone out there that the January 6th defendants, many of them are being excessively and unfairly prosecuted, for crimes that are often nonviolent misdemeanors. Most of them just walk through the lobby of the Capitol, maybe waving a flag or a sign or a banner, and they're having the entire book, hook, line, and sinker, thrown at them. And one of the felony charges that the Department of Injustice has levied at a lot of them is the charge of obstruction of an official proceeding. Now, it's interesting. It seems that the federal statute that authorizes that was passed in the wake of the Enron scandal to deal with white collar criminals who attempt to destroy evidence in that context, or destroy evidence to subvert any prosecution or lawful investigation into their activities. But some of the January 6th defendants are being charged with obstruction for having been in the Capitol, while the presidential election certification was allegedly going on. And it seems that there's a case that was argued literally just today, hours ago, before the Supreme Court, called Fisher versus United States. And if the Supreme Court rules as it's expected to, then that charge will be declared unconstitutional in the context of the January 6th defendants' alleged offenses. I just wanted to get your commentary real quick on what you think about the Department of Injustice's weaponization of that statute, to prosecute the charge of obstruction to prosecute the
Well,
these folks.
from all public accounts,
Mhm.
Philip, it appears to me that you're absolutely right. A weaponization. Uh, but as a judge, I'm very reluctant to make comments with respect to how would you rule or what do you think? What would your decision be? I'm cautious. I'd have to see what the facts are. I'd have to review those facts carefully before coming to some kind of a conclusion. But just based on what's been made available to the public, it just seems to me that there has been this weaponization and it's been unfairly applied here in this case. But I cannot tell without reviewing the facts of the case or each individual case or the conduct of the individuals.
Well, and of course, there's a big difference between, say, somebody who just walked around in the lobby, and waved a sign or a banner versus, someone who engaged in vandalism or,
Yeah.
graffiti or broke a window or something like that.
But
There is a difference.
Phil, there's some information at least is out there in the press somewhere that indicates that there are people who were within the Capitol who permitted them to enter, open gates and doors and things like that. And it turned out that some of these people were maybe even FBI personnel. I don't know that. This is what's rumored, and that's why it would be very difficult for me to say a lot about the J6
True.
events. Right?
Well, and of particular note, I think is the one of the more famous examples of that, alleged examples of that is Ray Epps. Mr. Ray Epps. He was caught on film multiple times. Even in the days leading up to January 6th, inciting people to enter the Capitol illegally, and he was doing it loudly. He was broadcasting it. He was trying to whip people up into a frenzy, and so he was caught on camera inciting imminent lawless action. And yet, it was only recently that he was prosecuted for anything, and even now he's only being charged. I think with a misdemeanor.
Yeah.
So that case is highly suspicious when you consider that there were people charged with multiple felonies for doing less than he did. So it does make one wonder who's with whom he's in league. It forces us to wonder about that. And if I may say real quick, and I'm sure Mr. Milton can back me up on this, I just want to clarify nothing that's said on this show constitutes legal advice. It's all for informational and educational and entertainment purposes. So it's not legal advice. If you require legal advice, please hire an attorney. I'm sure Mr. Milton would make the same
Or
recommendation
100%.
on that front. And don't make potentially self-incriminating statements without an attorney's advice and presence. Just wanted to clarify that right there. So we've got a couple of minutes left, sir. I was wondering, do you have any recommendations as to what might potentially be able to be done at the policy level to try to prevent this weaponization of the mechanism of law enforcement in the future that we're seeing often these days?
I think we need to get honest, credible people in the offices from the top down. I mean, I think most of the agents in, say, for instance, the FBI are honorable people, but they are given directives and things like that, and you must comply under many of the circumstances. But I think we need a complete change of administrations. In my view, and that's my personal view, Biden has been one of the worst and one of the most corrupt presidents that I have witnessed in my life, and I'm up there in age now. I'm not one of the youngsters out there in the street. But like I said, I've been a lawyer for nearly 46 years, and I have never seen this degree of corruption as at the presidential level.
Well, yes, and whether it's the Biden family or whether it's their willingness to operate as a de facto banana republic, to persecute their political opponents, we're entering into very scary times. But I think with the help of platforms such as this to spread the right kind of information about it, and with the help of very good and honorable attorneys like Mr. Milton here, I think that we can win this country back. I do, and I think we can return to the principles of the United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights and due process of law that once made our republic great, and will make it great again. I have no doubt with the aid of God, of course. And I also wanted to mention I decided to bring in Mr. Milton's campaign jacket that I purchased for a donation to his campaign for DA. It's a very fine material, and it's a memento I'm very, very proud to have. I intend to keep it as an heirloom. And thank you all so much, and God bless.